All right, everyone, welcome back to another Church Ops 500 podcast, where we take time really to dig into some of the challenges of church operations. Often people get to see the face of the ministry, the worship, the preaching, all of these things, but rarely do they stop to recognize that, hey, someone not only was setting out seats before you got here, they were changing out toilet paper, and they were making sure that leaks and building issues are being fixed, creating a place for us to do ministry at a high level. So this podcast is unapologetically for those folks in this operations director type seat where you're managing a lot of things. And if you're wondering whether or not this is for you, like I said, if you fielded questions from toilet paper to ministry to disciplinary issues to hiring, anything you can think of, if you know you're the person where that falls in your lap and you got to have an answer, or you're the person that there's a problem and they go, well, go ask. If that's your name, there's a good chance you are a person that fits well into this space. So the podcast is meant just to encourage, to bring life, and to help answer some hard questions. As always, I ask wherever you're viewing the content, I ask that you like, that you comment, and of course, share. We have our Facebook page as well. So if you have specific questions as we get into this podcast, we'd love to field them. We'd love to answer them in any way that we can. And also invite you to join our YouTube and our Facebook groups. And like I said, share the content. Less about us getting notoriety or being built up, and much more about getting this content, which I believe can be so transformative in being able to create a sustainable operations system within your church and getting that information to those folks. So I'm excited. I'm jumping into this right away. We have a guest with us today. I've gotten a chance to talk with Chris Kelly, Pastor Chris. He is at our church in Mid-Cities. For anyone who doesn't know, we are part of a larger family of churches called Every Nation. And this is one of my brothers in Christ. And we get to serve the same mission and really see God do amazing things in our communities and in our cities. So Pastor Chris is on staff with our Mid-Cities Church out in Big O, Texas. It's 20 years there. So definitely can give, I have no doubt, some amazing stories of fun moments he's been in. He is the executive pastor there. Functionally, he oversees the staff and all of the campuses. And when I say all, this is where it gets fun. We currently have 4 different campuses they're working on, 2 English-speaking congregations and 2 Spanish-speaking congregations. And Mid-Cities and has been a home has been his home for the vast majority of his Christian walk. So homegrown, which I always love to hear and love to see. Many times when we get into these places of talking through church operations, it's hard to find folks that were there from the beginning who have gotten to see all of the pieces. So I think Pastor Chris is going to bring some great things to the table. I invite you to sit back, to listen. Pastor Chris, let's jump in. I'd love for you to just take a moment, share your heart for this, man, a little bit of your background, how you got to where you are, all those fun things.
Yeah, definitely. First off, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here, and it's definitely a passion of mine to be able to help out where we can, and in this area of church operations. It's an animal. You gotta be able to do a good job at it. So thank you so much for being here. But yeah, my background, I didn't grow up as a Christian in Midland, Texas. Had a great family, but Christ was just not a part of my upbringing. And that it wasn't until I went off to college and almost weeks after arriving there, came into a group of friends, and they were a great group, and some tragedy hit my life, and they kind of came in, presented the gospel to me, and it was all new to me. I'd never heard this. And so gave my life to Christ, and God just started the journey there. I ended up coming back to Midland. I had gone off to college about 9 months after I gave my life to the Lord, and was kind of searching for a church and didn't have a clue where to go. Hadn't really ever gone to church before. And someone in town had recommended Mid-Cities. And so I started coming here, and it was pretty early on in my walk that I felt a calling to do this for a living, to be able to build God's house. And to be honest, I had no clue what that was. I was so naive. I thought, well, I've got to I've got to feed a family one day, and it looks like the only person that gets paid around here is the senior guy. So I guess that's what I'm called to do. And I shared that with our pastor at that time, which is Pastor Kevin York. And he's like, "Well, that's great. Definitely want to keep growing." I was about all of 2 minutes old in the Lord, and so hey, let's see some growth and see what God has for you. But if this is something, you might look at going, because I just gone and started college. He's like, you might look at getting your business degree. No matter what you do in the ministry, this would be very helpful if you did that. And so that's what I did. I just started pursuing that, and ended up graduating with my undergraduate degree, and went off and worked in the marketplace for about a year. And then almost on the year anniversary, I came back, and it was kind of a miraculous thing how I became a staff member here at Mid-Cities. But it was after that that I realized, yeah, I'm not called to be the main guy. I don't have the makeup. But what I did notice is I could help run things, and help with strategy, and help strategically orchestrate executing the vision that God had for the church, and really developed a passion for that. And man, that was over 20 years ago. And there's been different changes in my role between then and now. But man, I've loved it, and so excited to be a part of it.
Amen. I think one of the things is unique, or not unique, very normal with folks. You'll also hear me reference our jobs as the number two. Often we find ourselves in that seat, and almost without fail, every time I talk to a number two, they go, "Nope, I don't want the number one job. Don't want it. Quite content where I am. This is the gig." So every once in a while, you'll find a guy who's like, "Hey," or a gal who's climbing the ladder. But I think there is a unique calling to find contentment in that number two position, and going, got no desire to run the ship, love having the role of supporting those that are doing the work. So a lot of moments in your testimony definitely speak to things that I think are true to many of the people in this seat. So thank you for sharing and kind of giving us insight to where you got to be. And I do want to take a moment and say, Pastor Chris mentioned this as we got going. If you do hear some jackhammers in the background or any of those things, they are actually in the midst of repairing their building. A few things happened on their end with some weather that came through. And that's another place, again, as folks in the operations world, we have our day planned, and then our day plans us once we get going. So being willing to field these things and be flexible. So if we hear a little of that in the background, just consider it great ambiance music to help us get really set in the job that we do. And of course, you'll see I don't have a bunch of extra microphones or any of those things because I really want to challenge us to use the resources that we have. You'll hear me say this all the time in our podcast, that it's our resources don't define us, but how we use them says everything about us. So that is the goal, to work from where you are, to use what you have. So Pastor Chris, we're going to jump into topic today. He's got some great insight. We went back and forth about trying to find one that really fit. And we landed with this, and I think it's really going to speak to the heart of some of the things that we've all been challenged with. So I'm going to talk today about how to stay in ministry for the long haul. So ministry sustainability. Again, I feel like anyone has been in this seat. If you haven't, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When you find that limit, you go, I'm completely overwhelmed. This is taking everything I've got. Is this a job that I even want to do? It's one of my hearts and passions for this is often people who would be great at this position end up stepping away because it becomes too consuming, too heavy, too weighty, because we didn't get a chance to learn those skills, those abilities that create the sustainability, the margin that we need to do this job. I think most people in this position would attest, there's really, unless I'm intentional about it, there really is no point where my phone gets turned off, where I'm not the first phone call, where I'm not the first email, I'm not the first, well, ask them if they can take care of this. And I think what Pastor Chris has to share to us today can really create some balance in our ministry, and I think help us achieve what we're all after. I want to be doing this for a while. I don't want to get 5 years in and be burnt out and be tired and exhausted and want to quit. I want to put my hands on something that I get to see 20 years worth. So I feel like if Pastor Chris can last 20 years and he's still got a smile on his face, he's still laughing, man, there's hope for all of us. So I'm going to give it to you, Pastor Chris. Take us through, teach us.
Yeah, well, definitely. When we talked about this topic, I was so excited about it because we all hear those statistics of longevity in ministry, and there's different roles that we hear about. You typically hear the youth pastor. Youth pastor gets like 5 years, whatever it is. Church ops guys, man, they're definitely on the list of not lasting a long time. And you said this. I just want to reiterate it, though. It is completely normal to question, man, is this for me? Did I really hear the Lord? There's been seasons where I almost had to fire myself on a daily basis, and then I got to rehire myself, got to re-up. But yeah, it's completely normal. If that's not happening, call me up, let me know what's going on, how you're doing that. But from everyone I've ever talked to, you're definitely thinking of quitting on a regular basis, but it's what keeps you there. There's different tips on how to do that, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But yeah, the first one is just setting boundaries, unapologetically setting boundaries. Man, this ops role can kind of be a nonstop, grueling game of whack-a-mole. Things are constantly coming at you. Like you said, the people are constantly calling, wondering if we can do this, or emergencies happening. And if you don't set boundaries, you're going to run out of steam. You're going to run out of passion. And you're going to turn away from what God has called you to do. And so setting those boundaries, it's in a lot of different areas. It's the work hours. We live in a culture right now where you're constantly accessible. And so setting those boundaries with your work hours, making sure you delineate time at home and you delineate from the time that you have at work, and helping set that culture up where you're at, working with your senior leader, and being able to say, hey, what kind of culture do we want here? And being able to set that culture of setting boundaries and making sure that your staff's not calling you at 6 o'clock in the morning or after 10 o'clock at night. And the larger you get, I know we're talking to churches primarily 500 and under, but the goal is that you're going to be growing. Whether it's growing other sites that are 500 and under, or your site's going to be over that, and your staff grows with that. And everyone has different work habits, but I think helping create that culture of what's okay, what's not, having a good work-home life balance, like I said, making sure you're drawing lines there, setting communication preferences. Again, texts at 6 o'clock in the morning, they're just not okay. But you've got to be a part of that, and setting that culture. And so doing all those things. And I think another one, depending on where you're at, I know each one of these roles is different, and especially in churches where you are at 500, 100, you might be the ops guy, but you have a ministry piece as well. And there might be counseling and emergencies that go on with that. And anytime you get a counseling emergency, it's always an emergency to the person calling. But the 2 a.m. call because of marriages falling apart, man, that marriage has been falling apart for 3 years now. And so it's going to be okay. It's going to last till tomorrow morning, or if it's on the weekend, Monday morning, whatever it is. But unapologetically setting those boundaries so that your passion, the energy that you have is not constantly being used up. And so definitely set the boundaries, work with your senior leader to be able to set those for your staff, and go from there.
Yeah, I definitely just resonate with so much of that, especially in that last piece, because you're right. I think we often find those number twos fall into, well, I'm doing premarital counseling, I'm doing marriage counseling, and I'm trying to help to manage and care for the staff as well. A lot of those boxes we end up filling, and just really embracing. I just want to highlight one of the things. All of it was great. I want to highlight one of the things you said, just that idea of, man, if it was falling apart, it's been falling apart. And you being on a call at 2 a.m. in the morning, man, it's not going to magically fix that marriage in that moment. That problem is still going to be there tomorrow. And I think it just speaks to that idea of the longevity of ministry. One of the things I tell my team all the time is we're running a marathon, not a sprint. So what does that marathon look like? A marathon runner isn't given everything we got to every moment. They can't. They're setting a pace, a tempo that says, hey, these are the boundaries that I work from. And it would take something very extraordinary for me to step away from this. Hey, I'm not telling you, you get a phone call from someone who's suicidal, wait till next weekend. No, of course, there are things, but being able to delineate between them, being able to say, here is the lens with which I view these moments. Here's a real emergency based off of fact. And here's an emergency that feels like it's an emergency for that person. And being able to separate the two is huge. So I love it. I love it. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, the second tip we have is, and this is kind of a no-brainer tip, to stay in ministry, you got to rest. And setting up rhythms of rest is huge. You've got to be able to schedule that out. And, you know, the big one that we hear a lot about is the weekly Sabbath, taking a day off. And that's definitely part of it. But there's other rhythms on top of that. One of those is just rhythm throughout the day of resting. I don't know if you ever remember this clip from the movie Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith playing Chris Gardner at the Dean Witter internship. And he's got all that. He's trying to beat everyone out on these calls and do a great job. And he looks around and he sees these other guys getting up and getting water. And then they waste time getting the water. Then they got to drink the water. Then they got to go to the bathroom for the water. He's like, I just cut all that out. I just stopped drinking altogether so that I could get ahead of them and beat them. And there's part of my personality that's like that. No, we got all this work. I just got to keep going, got to keep going. But the reality of it is you've got to schedule breaks throughout the day. My kids, I got 3 kids. We homeschool all of them. And they are in an online class with a lady that does Saxon math. And one of the videos she has, it's like a 30-second to a minute video that they watch. It's called Corny Brain Break. And the whole premise of it is you've been using the left side of your brain, you're problem solving, you're doing all these things, and then you just need to reset it. You need to watch something so completely stupid that it'll jar your brain to stop thinking like that. Just take a break from it. And so whatever that looks like for you, it could be, man, I'm going to go walk around the block. I'm going to go and just pray. I'm going to just shut my door and put a sign up and say, do not disturb. And you do that a couple times during the day. And it's a good little break. Obviously weekly breaks. I think of the Sabbath, and it's probably one of the most abused commandments out there that there is. I mean, I think of the Lord, we see the pattern that he took in the week of creation of taking the 7th day for rest. And I think it was important enough of one of 10 things that he tells us either to do or not to do. It's one of those, to take the Sabbath, take that weekly rest. Yet so many of us, we get in the habit of not doing it, or we think because we're working on our phone at home, then that's the Sabbath, but it's really not. We've got to find out what that Sabbath is. We've got to find out what brings us life, what helps us cease from working. And we've got to take part of that, and we've got to hold it sacred, not in a religious kind of way, but our legalistic kind of way, but in a way that we know that it's a grace, it's a gift from God to bring our souls rest, to renew our passions, and to keep us moving for the long haul. So that's weekly. Monthly, this is something that we did with our staff quite a while ago, but we initiated a day with Jesus. And we told all of our ministry staff, hey, we want you to schedule one day a month. We're not going to tell you what day it is, but the idea is you go and you spend that with Jesus. You can study, you can worship, you can write, you can do whatever it is, but I want you to spend 8 hours straight of connecting with God.
Love that.
on a monthly basis. And again, it does it's those breaks or those rhythms that we have of rest that are so helpful. Um, Quarterly or yearly, you're looking at your PTO schedule, taking time away, taking time off, be intentional with those things. Everyone has their personal life rhythm. And you have obviously a church calendar rhythm where things are busy and when things are not. I know for me, Mother's Day is extremely busy for me. I've got a wife, a mom, a mother-in-law, a grandma, and I'm really the only kid taking care of all of them. And then my middle child's birthday always lands on Mother's Day weekend. And so for me, a rhythm, man, I take a couple days off before that weekend and a couple days off after that weekend. I know it's going to be crazy busy, but I'm not trying to do work in that. And so utilize those times. We do calendar planning twice a year. And we require our guys, hey, I want to see 5 consecutive days on the calendar where you're taking your PTO and being intentional about it. And so we require that. And the final one, we have a sabbatical policy here at Mid-Cities where it's 6 weeks where you're completely unplugged. And it's pretty hardcore. You have to disconnect your email. You don't take any phone calls. You can't come to church. If you're going to a group, it has to be a group you're not leading. It has to be, go to lunch with friends, things like that, people you would go just to connect with, but no work at all for 6 months or for 6 weeks. I'm sorry. And you got to be here a while to be eligible for that. You got to be in the ministry for 10 years, full-time ministry for the first one, and then 7 years after that. But scheduling these rhythms of rest and making sure that we're intentional about it, it's huge. It's going to bring you life. It's going to keep you having energy, and it'll lessen the chances of burnout when you do that.
Yeah. And I think when we think about that idea of rest, I think, again, I find that our ops folks are just cut from a different cloth, and what is rest for us may not seem like rest for normal people at all. And I think there's definitely that place where if you don't recognize that, it becomes really challenging to do that, because I think if we aren't careful, rest means sitting around and doing nothing. And that is most of us. That's our version of hell. Like, if we had to say, this is what hell will look like, my brain is constantly running and I'm not doing anything. So really stopping and going, okay, what does rest look like? Most of the time for us, rest for us, someone else looks at it and goes, that's just more work. Why would you do that? And I go, no, I actually enjoy building things while I'm off. I actually enjoy finishing that book that I was working on while I'm off. I've got a home project that's been staring me in the face for months, and I'm actually excited about getting to that guy and getting it done. So I think from that, just us really taking the time to figure out what you said, Pastor Chris, what actually refuels us. Not just taking time off for the sake of time off, but taking the time to really ask those questions intentionally and actually meter it. Man, I even challenge our team, evaluate the rest. When you get back, man, what went well? What do you feel like refreshed you? Were there things that drained you? And not just assuming that because you've been gone that you've rested. And I love the place for the sabbatical. I think we're looking at challenging our teams for more of that as well. Getting that prayer day in, I think, is so huge, because all of the things you spoke to are they create a lifestyle and not just a release mechanism. It's too much, I'm overwhelmed, I need to take a break, versus no, there's a consistent rhythm to it that just keeps letting that steam off the top out and keeping you regulated well in that safe place where you're not going to do damage to yourself mentally, physically, or spiritually. Yeah. So love it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you get so high stress and you're constantly moving. So many guys, burnout is one of the reasons that you're not going to be in the ministry for a long time. But you can foul out as well. And so when you have all that stress built up, you gotta take care of that. And you got to take care of it in a constructive way. and not in ways that we see so often that are taking people in ministry out. And so rest is a way to counteract that for sure.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for being with us today. This concludes part 1 of a 2-part series with Pastor Chris. Invite you to look out next month. We release the first Thursday of every month, part 2. Today we got to talk about setting boundaries, reset rhythms, and next week we're going to jump into the final 3 points: following God's vision for your role, get and keep your financial house in order, and of course, stay connected to the vine. Looking forward to having Pastor Chris back. Hopefully you were encouraged. Hopefully the information today really drove home the need for community, the need to set a strong rhythm for what you do. I'd like to thank you for being a part of this. As always, please, please, please share, like, rate the content wherever you consume it so that we can get the word out to other operational directors, all of those folks who sit in this seat. Remember, your amount of resources don't speak for you, but how you use them says everything. Every day with the right tools, it's possible for you to do the impossible with less. Please, please like, share. Love you guys. Praying blessings over each and every one of your ministries. See you next week. Not next week. Just kidding. See you next month. I'm so excited about it. I want it to be next week. See you next month for our part 2 series on how to stay in ministry for the long haul.